term malnutrition first appeared in the middle of the 20th century. A many-faceted condition, it was defined as an imbalance in the nutritional status, caused by too few or too many essential nutrients. But the history books recount only the extreme and tragic form of malnutrition, famine. The result of war, disease, and climate change, famine has been the scourge of humanity since time began. Pediatricians were the first to develop an interest in malnutrition through their work with children. At the beginning of the 20th century, Professor Antoine Marfont, one of the French founders of pediatrics, described a state he called athrepsia, literally, a child with no growth. World War II and its devastating impact on the nutritional status of the people of Europe, and especially that of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto and prisoners of war, accelerated research into causes and treatment of malnutrition. In 1945, English physician John Waterlow, a specialist in child malnutrition, began studying causes of Kwashiorkor syndrome, a severe form of malnutrition characterized by edema and a distended belly. He also drew up a classification of the various classes of malnutrition, from stunting to wasting. The Waterlow classification was to have a major influence around the world on those involved in nutrition. It took until the end of the 20th century for medical treatment of malnutrition to become firmly established. In 1993, leading international researchers and aid organizations specialized in malnutrition-related issues agreed on the need for a protocol to treat severe acute malnutrition. A high-energy milk powder became the cornerstone of this new protocol. A company, Nutriset, worked on developing F100, the first ready-to-dilute therapeutic milk. And in August 1993, it was tested successfully in Rwanda. But the search continued for another product, even better adapted to conditions on the ground, and that the countries concerned could manufacture themselves. This was accomplished in 1996, when a mixture of peanuts, sugar, and milk was developed, bringing about the first ready-to-use therapeutic food paste. Affecting close to 800 million people, almost 10% of the world's population, malnutrition is one of humanity's worst plagues. The proportion of the world's population that is malnourished has decreased in the past 10 years, from 18.7% to 11.3% in developing countries. But, given the growth in population, the absolute number of people suffering from malnutrition has in fact increased. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of malnutrition in the world, with 1 in every 4 Africans not getting enough to eat. Asia, the most populated continent, has 2/3 of the world's malnourished population. But East and Southeast Asia have made spectacular progress. Whereas 40% of their inhabitants were malnourished in the 1970s, this number has now dropped down to 10%. In South America and the Caribbean, the number of people suffering from hunger has fallen by 2/3 since 1990. Not getting enough food can lead to the medical condition called malnutrition, and children are the most vulnerable. Every year, over 2.5 million children under the age of 5 die of malnutrition. Malnutrition is frequently an underlying cause of infant mortality. And when malnutrition accompanies other diseases, such as malaria, AIDS, pneumonia, or tuberculosis, it exacerbates the health status of young children and precipitates death. Malnutrition can be chronic or acute. In the first case, it's a poor diet that persists over time and impairs children's development. In South Asia, 46%, or almost half of children, suffer from chronic malnutrition. And in Africa, that number is 38%. When the body has to consume its own tissue to survive, the medical term changes, and the condition is referred to as acute malnutrition. In India, 25 million young children suffer from it. Some of the other worst affected countries are Nigeria, Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, China, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, and the Philippines. Malnutrition is a matter of economics. In Niger, 80% of inhabitants live off agriculture. But the country isn't able to feed all of its population, and so finds itself in a situation of chronic malnutrition. Lack of rainfall and poor harvests result in food crises, like those seen in 1996, 2005, and 2010. The body absorbs, assimilates, and transforms food to produce energy and heat. The World Health Organization's definition of malnutrition is an imbalance between the body's energy requirements and the effective intake of adequate nutrients. Children are most vulnerable to malnutrition because their growing bodies have very specific needs. As long as they're breastfed, babies benefit from a complete nutrition until the age of 6 months. The risk of malnutrition often starts when they're weaned. There are several types of malnutrition. Chronic malnutrition is when children are exposed to a prolonged nutritional deficit, which stunts their physical and mental development. Acute malnutrition is often the result of a famine. When a child doesn't have enough food for vital functions, the body consumes its own fat, tissue, and muscles. Initially, we speak of moderate acute malnutrition. If it persists, it progresses to a more severe, life-threatening form of malnutrition. There are 2 forms of severe acute malnutrition. The most common is called marasmus. Children suffer from tissue and muscle wasting and become emaciated. The second type of severe acute malnutrition is Kwashiorkor. We've all seen pictures of children who have Kwashiorkor. They're the malnourished ones with the distended abdomens. They suffer from water retention. They develop edema of the feet, and in the worst cases, over their whole body. Kwashiorkor affects children who, for example, are weaned too quickly when a younger sibling replaces them at their mother's breast. The immune system weakens, and the child is at risk of other childhood diseases. For a long time, scientists thought that Kwashiorkor was the result of insufficient protein combined with an infection. But even now, nobody knows exactly why it develops. To fight malnutrition, the first priority is to promote breastfeeding immediately after birth and throughout the first 6 months of life. To screen for chronic malnutrition, the height for age ratio is a good indicator. For acute malnutrition, a simple graduated band is used. It's slipped around the arm of children over 6 months of age. It can be used easily by community members and is a rapid way to detect acute malnutrition. The band is divided into 3 sections: green, yellow, and red. The green section indicates that the child is well nourished. The yellow section signifies moderate malnutrition, and the red section, the child has severe acute malnutrition and requires immediate treatment. To prevent and treat different types of malnutrition, children are prescribed nutritional supplements. For moderate acute malnutrition, ready-to-use pastes are used to complement the regular diet of the child. They contain animal protein, vegetable fats, sugars, and micronutrients. Children suffering from severe acute malnutrition need therapeutic food. Their contents are very similar to the supplementary foods, but have a richer calorie content and must be the only food the child eats until they recover.
My daughter wasn't well. Her skin was saggy and loose. The health worker told me to give her 1 spoonful in the morning, 1 in the middle of the day, and 1 in the evening. I've only used 2 pots, and already my daughter has really changed. I'm very happy.
Children suffering from severe acute malnutrition and another associated disease, such as malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, or a respiratory infection, must be hospitalized.
We've seen tremendous progress in the treatment of malnutrition over the last 20 to 30 years. First, with the development of standardized and ready-to-prepare therapeutic milk like F75 and F100, and then next with the creation of ready-to-use therapeutic food products like Pumpy Nut. The second step allowed us also to get out of the hospital and into the communities, and thus facilitating the ability to upscale the treatment of malnutrition so that we could treat many more children. Despite these advances, there are still millions of children that die from malnutrition. The problem is not a lack of treatment. We have a treatment that's effective in treating malnutrition. The problem is access to this treatment. We work on developing strategies that are simplified and that are adapted to specific contexts, and we hope that through this we will be able to screen and diagnose the children that are in most need of treatment, and then also get the treatment to those that are in need of it to be able to prevent them from dying. Nutrition is just one aspect of a child's health, and really in order to prevent malnutrition we need to look at a child's health globally. We need to look at their development, we need to make sure that they get their vaccines, that they have the appropriate medical care in order to prevent malnutrition, to prevent the diseases that cause malnutrition. Examples of this are HIV, TB, measles, malaria. These are all childhood illnesses that make a child more likely to develop malnutrition. These are approaches that can only be realized from a political standpoint, economic, agricultural standpoints. We need to make sure that there's enough food in quality and quantity, and that it gets to those who need it. So to conclude, it's essential that we continue to find and treat children with malnutrition, especially those that are at high risk of death because of this malnutrition.